So Kirsty, tell me more about your writing for young children. How did it start?
Well, when I was growing up in Australia in the 60s, we were very much a colonial nation in that all the books that we were given to read as children were, well, the same as Indian children reading an English read, Enid Blyton, the British classics. I used to think that nothing interesting ever happened in Australia because there was no authentic or very little authentic Australian literature for young people. So basically, by the time you came to read Australian literature, you already were on a back foot. You already thought that the powerful stories came from London or New York, which is terribly sad, because I think you lose a sense of your own strengths and your own cultural strengths, and I think this is a big problem for Indian children. I've spoken in many Indian schools and observed the same sort of, well, our stories are good, but their stories are better. And it's sort of a colonization of the young reader's mind that is the backwash from hundreds of years of colonialism. And so I actually write for young people because I'm seditious, and I think it's important to do it politically, and I don't want the young people of my country to grow up with that sense of every story has to be set in LA or New York or London, because if it's set in Panjim or if it's set in Chennai, then it's not really a story because nothing happens in our cities. And I think that's a big problem for young people reading and writing in English all around the world, that the economic hegemonies of the British and the Americans have been a very dangerous and destructive force, and that force is what shapes our adult literary writers, so that they say, I want to be read in California, not Kerala. And this is where it starts. It starts with the formation of the reader.
But this is a very specialized genre. How do you enter the minds of young children?
I think
no one that entertains them, especially in a digital age where, reading habits are falling.
Well, I was interested in what C.P. said about his children's reading. And actually, if you want to read violence, if you look at the mythologies that we read to young children, Grimm's fairy tales, you can't get much more gruesome than having birds peck people's eyes out. That's pretty heavy.
Hansel and Gretel.
Yes, or having fathers chop their sons' heads off. I mean, children actually subjected to a lot of violence in children's literature. Gravitating towards the online content is because there's not enough literature particularly in India. It's a new form, which you have some wonderful writers working in, like Ranjit Lal, who's written some beautiful historical fiction and very, very provocative young adult stories. There's not enough of it, and there's not enough people advocating for it and putting these books in the hands of the young readers, because every literary form needs an advocate to help it find its readers.
Sorry, Savia.
I really admire a lot of Indian writers, because I think in Australia I'm quite lucky. I can live from my writing. The grants are helpful for specific projects, but I'm endlessly admiring people who write here, who are writing in much more of a corner, really, because there's not that breadth of support. And certainly in Australia we do have literary writers who, because their sales are much smaller, are more cornered. My readership, because every 3 years it renews itself, so your books are constantly fresh. When you write for children and teenagers, they grow up, and inside a few years you've got a new readership. Whereas an adult readership tends to grow a little bit stale unless you're lucky enough to write a classic. They've read you and they abandon you. They're very fickle. Children are fickle too, but then they're self-renewing all the time. So